2024, and we are going to start with our board clerk walking us through who is here or who is attending virtually.
Thank you, Chair. I will begin to my left of those participating in person. Director Showalter.
Here.
Scozola.
Here.
Mohan.
Here.
Mekachuk.
Present.
Chair Walia.
Here.
Director Rennie.
Here.
Meadows.
Here.
Srinivasan.
Here.
Martinez Beltran.
Here.
Participating remotely, Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Director Hilton.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum of our board this evening.
Thank you, Andrea. At this point, I would like to call for public comment on matters that are not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anyone, Andrea, in person or online? Okay. Let's move on to the consent calendar item. We have items 1A through 1J. Does any member of the board want to pull anything out of consent? Seeing none, do we have any public comment? No?
No.
Okay, bring it back to the board. Do I have a motion to move the consent calendar?
I so move. Second.
Did you get the names, Andrea?
Yes, Mohan first, seconded by Director Martinez Beltran.
Okay, wonderful. Would you proceed with the vote, please?
Thank you. Chair Walia.
Aye.
Director Scozola.
Aye.
Mohan.
Aye.
Meadows.
Aye.
Rennie.
Aye.
Mekachuk.
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
Showalter. Srinivasan.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Director
Yes.
Hilton.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Hilton.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Andrea. We'll move on to the regular calendar on tonight's agenda, and we'll start with the CEO's report. Before we proceed, I would like to welcome our new, now official new CEO, Monica Padilla. It's her first board meeting with us. Welcome and wishing you the best of luck to you personally and to SVCE under your leadership. We look forward to that, CEO Padilla.
Well, thank you. I think I've had many opportunities to say thank you already, so I will make it very short and just say thank you, and nice to see the whole board, Chair Walea. So I get to report some pretty exciting stuff in the CEO report, my first one, including recognizing a couple of new employees and some promotions. So we'll start with Oswaldo Martinez. He is our new Senior Program Specialist, reporting to Rapport HireMath in our decarbonization programs and policies department. I think I might have said that backwards. So Oswaldo's going to say a few words.
Give it a shot here. Hello, members of the board. Oswaldo Martinez. Like Monica had said, I'm going to be working in the DPP team as a senior energy program specialist. My first role here will be to manage the Future Fit Homes program. I come from your CCA neighbor to the south, Central Coast Community Energy, otherwise known as 3CE. I spent about 3.5 years there. Prior to that, I volunteered with Peace Corps in Nicaragua. I also volunteered with AmeriCorps for 2 years here in California. It gave me a really deep appreciation for working in the utility sector in those 2 years that I was in AmeriCorps. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in the city of LA, moved to the Central Coast in San Luis Obispo, and you can find me usually outdoors. Always open to an invitation if you would like to invite me to play soccer or, more lately, play pickleball. It's nice to meet you.
Welcome to SVCE, Oswaldo.
Right. Our next new employee is also a new function for us at SVCE. Michael Callahan, who will be our general counsel, reporting to me, and he will also like to say a few words to the board.
Hello, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you all tonight and to join SVCE as your general counsel. I spent nearly 10 years representing CCAs with Marine Clean Energy, and over that time, fought for fair rules, fought for funding for customer programs, had a lot of challenges and a lot of victories, and just really excited to kind of continue that work here in support of all the incredible procurement of clean energy and programs serving our communities. A little bit about me. I have a daughter, 6 years old, Audrey. She is incredible. Enjoy spending time with her quite a bit. And love swimming, a little bit of sculpting lately with air dry clay. Happy to chat about it if anybody's curious. It's a lot of fun and very forgiving as well as a medium. And yeah, just really pleasure to be here and meet with y'all.
Welcome to SVCE, Michael.
Okay, before I go on to announce some promotions, I also want to recognize that this will likely be Tricia Ortiz's, our higher general counsel from RWG or Richards, Watsons, and Gershon. It'll be her last evening attending our board meeting because Mike will be doing it starting next month. So I want to recognize her. She's been very, very helpful to staff. We'll continue to rely on RWG on a lot of the kind of day-to-day stuff that we need until Mike gets fully onboarded. So if you wouldn't mind just joining me in thanking Tricia. Okay, well, I also get the privilege of announcing a couple of promotions. The first one is Raul Hernandez, who was promoted to marketing lead on the Energy Services and Customer Relation team, and he will be reporting or continues to report to Pam Leonard. And then the last promotion is for Marin Wenzel, who will be our new Director of Regulatory Policy and Planning, reporting to me as well. So all well-deserved promotions, and again, we're excited to have Oswaldo and Mike join our team. A couple of other things I wanted to note from our CEO report, including if you read the CEO report, you read that we had a project come online last month on March 29th. It's called Victory Pass. It's a Clearway project. It's a 200 megawatts solar photovoltaic with a 50 megawatt 4-hour lithium ion battery that we split 50-50 with Central Coast Community Energy. The project is located down in, I think, Riverside County. And when it's fully up and running, it's going to meet about 8% of our needs. So we're excited. This is our 8th long-term power purchase agreement that we brought online, and our 5th new resource that we added to the California ISO's grid. So excited about that. We believe there'll be a ribbon cutting in the fall of 2024 because it is pretty hot out there, and so we hope that you can all join us. And Tina, we look forward to seeing you cut the ribbon this time as the chair. And then I'm inviting Pam to come up and provide a quick update on some of the Earth Day / Earth Month events that we have scheduled in your communities.
Evening, directors. Pamela Leonard, Deputy Director of Marketing and Communications, and I'm here to wish you Happy Earth Month. This is the big leagues for Silicon Valley Clean Energy every year. As you know, we are doing 15 events in the month of April, and some that I just want to highlight. So City of Sunnyvale is going to have the official public grand opening of their City Hall, which we helped fund the solar and battery storage as part of our resilience grants. But we're going to have our F-150 Lightning out there powering a food truck. And winners of our Electric Showcase Awards have been invited by the city to table and be just peer-to-peer customers, residents of the city, answering questions about going all electric. So we're very excited about that. We'll also be sponsoring the solar stage again here at the Cupertino Earth Day event. And on 4/20, there are 5 Earth Day events that single day. So shout out to our staff and those of you who've been invited to stop by. We welcome you at our booth. And I just also want to highlight some education events. So there's also a lot of opportunities to engage with schools. So tomorrow our team will be at the Fremont Union High School district-wide Earth Day event that is at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. And Saratoga Elementary School does a fun Earth Day festival. We'll be returning there. And at the end of the month, the Santa Clara County Office of Education does a climate literacy summit, which is a way to educate educators about how to teach the great work that we do. So happy Earth Month. That's my update. Thank you.
All right, the last thing in the CEO report to highlight is a new format that we provided to provide kind of an outlook of what we intend to bring to the board over the next few months. So this is an attachment to the CEO report. Andrea did a fabulous job creating this new format so you can see what big topic items we have coming. So, being my first official board meeting, it happens to be one where there's not a whole lot of action items, so which is okay because it gave us some time to really focus on some study sessions or some educational items to bring to the board. We've heard very often from different board members that they want some opportunities to learn a little bit more about some of the programs that we offer or some of the policies or some of just what we do in general. So we took this opportunity to kind of put a few items on your agenda for the benefit of your learning experience. So the first one, I'm going to invite Justin Segunas, who is the Director of Decarb Programs and Policy, and Hannah Gustafsson, who is a Senior Program Specialist, to talk to you all about decarbonization programs and policy overview of our residential electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. So we'll have them come up here, and I will move over.
Thank you, Monica. And before we move on to item number 3, I'd just like to take a moment, Justin, please. I'd like to take a moment to congratulate the 2 SVCE current members who have been promoted, Raul Hernandez and Mauren Wenzel. I can see Mauren is here. Congratulations, and we are looking forward to your continued fabulous work as Team SVCE. And once again, thanks to Andrea for the updated Outlook forecast. Keeps us informed. And Pam, thank you for the Earth Day events, to you and the rest of SVCE team members who put all those together, especially the 20th. That's a big task, being there in 5 different locations across the county. Thank you. Okay, with that, let's move on to item number 3, which, as Monica just mentioned, we are going to have a study session. Justin Segunas, Director of Decarb Programs and Policy, and Hannah Gustafsson, Senior Program Specialist. All yours.
Great, perfect timing. I just got settled, so appreciate that. Good evening, directors. Excited to be back with another info program study session. We had the last one in October talking about built environment, and so today we're here on another topic. But one of my most exciting things is to talk about data, share data. It really, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we get to look at on a daily basis, and so I really relish the opportunity to share it with all of you. We're also going to talk about a couple of programs that I'm highlighting out of our portfolio. And my goal today is to cover these things. I'm targeting to speak for less than 15 minutes at the beginning, so that we can spend, something on the order of 20, 30 minutes in the Q&A discussion stage, because I know we do have some other very interesting items tonight. If you do have more questions, though, that we don't get to tonight, please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to talk with you about them, about programs, data you saw, data you didn't see. Really happy to share that with you. Okay, so I want to start with this pie chart showing emissions in SVCE territory. Again, you saw this in October. You can see, emissions overall in SVCE territory has decreased from 4 million metric tons CO2 equivalent in 2015 down to 3.1 in 2022. And these are the main sectors. When we look at some of the sectors where a lot of the machines are, so these are the fossil fuel burning machines that we're trying to replace and get rid of. There's over 1 million machines that comprise 78% of the emissions across these sectors. And so today, I'm going to be focusing on residential vehicles, ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine. And this is a little over 1/3 of the remaining emissions in SVCE service territory. So it's a big sector. So let's get into the data. The statewide Clean Cars Rule is a really important rule. It sets that by 2035, 100% of new car sales need to be zero-emission vehicles. And then they have this sort of pathway in gray on the right that you can see. You can see where we are today as a state on the left and as a county. And so Santa Clara County really, kind of far above the state and far ahead of where we need to be for this statewide rule when we think about new car sales. So when we then look at, again, for Santa Clara County, but we pivot to the kind of current fleet of vehicles. So all the population of vehicles that are out there, not just the new sales. You can see in blue here, it shows the battery electric vehicles. So most of the zero emissions vehicles in our territory are battery electric at this point. There's a tiny number of fuel cell vehicles in orange that you can see. And then there's plug-in hybrid vehicles. And so those also make up a sizable portion, but really it's dominated by the battery electric vehicles in our territory. And between 2018 and 2022, the number of battery electric vehicles actually has more than doubled. So we're seeing a lot of growth, and that is reflected in those new car sales numbers from the previous slide as well. But there is a long way to go. And so the slide I just showed you is kind of down at the bottom right here. It's the PHEV and the BEV numbers. 92% of the light duty vehicles in our territory are still internal combustion engine, right? And so, really our objective as we think about decarbonizing and getting our territory to zero emissions is how do we get all of these ICE vehicles off the road eventually? And that's through replacing them with electric vehicles. It's through, mode shifting, more public transit, all these different things. SVCE sort of has a role to play in all of this. We've been largely focused on electric vehicles and EV charging, but it's really an all of the above strategy as we work out ways as a community to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled through internal combustion engine vehicles. And then zooming in even further into just SVCE territory. So this is some data that we get from the DMV. There are some caveats associated with it, but I think it's really interesting just to look at almost 3/4 of the vehicles, of the battery electric vehicles in our territory are Tesla, which, probably when you use the eye test as you're driving around in this area, that's not surprising to you. But I still thought it was striking as you look at this data that really is showing up. Okay, and then let's talk for a second about who owns electric vehicles. So or who uses them. The chart on the left shows that of all the electric vehicles in our territory, 13% are registered at multifamily parcels, and 87% are registered at single-family parcels. And this, maybe makes intuitive sense. We've included a couple of statistics here from some survey work showing that EV purchase costs and lack of home charging are both major barriers to EV adoption for multifamily residents. And then on the right, you can see, so SEVI is our socioeconomic vulnerability index, which looks at characteristics around poverty, linguistic isolation, and some other factors. It's a CPUC defined metric. When you look at our census tracts that are the most vulnerable, so the quarter of our census tracts that are most vulnerable, they comprise about 11% of the EV ownership. So that's at the far right there. So those are the most vulnerable customers, are least likely to be driving EVs. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and just talk about EV charging for a second. I've got some example information for level 1, level 2, and level 3 chargers on the left, including how many miles they can add per hour, which is a really kind of useful way to think about charging speed. And I think it's important to note the average resident on kind of a day-to-day basis drives 17.6 miles. And so even like a level 1 charger there, as you can see, that's sufficient to charge your average charging overnight. Now, if you do a big trip, something like that, level 1 can be insufficient to actually fill your battery, and maybe you need more of a level 2, or you go to a level 3 fast charger, which is out in the public. But this is these are the standard things we think about for different charging infrastructure. We've got the EV charging pyramid on the right, which is really just a way to reflect that today, when we look at the data, the vast majority of charging is happening at home. So this is something like 75, 80%. both in state literature as well as looking at data that we have from some of our own programs. For people who have EVs today, this is what is working. Mostly home charging, some amount of workplace, some amount of public. Now, as we think about continuing to reach new populations and get more and more people into electric vehicles, the proportions may change. Some people may be better served by more workplace charging or by more public. So it's important to kind of think that depending on who you're trying to reach, how they want to charge, how they need to charge, that influences how much charging is actually needed in each of these locations. There's a lot of stuff on this slide, so I'll just highlight two things. The top chart on the left shows Santa Clara County, the total number of public EV charging ports. So we're at about 4,700 ports today. And you can see that's mostly public level 2 charging, some amount of public DC fast charging. And when you compare this to the Bay Area, you see that on the bottom, there's about 13,000 public chargers in the Bay Area. Based on the NREL estimate for total charging ports needed in the Bay Area by 2030, that's about 1/4 of the public charging that will be needed. That doesn't include residential charging, that doesn't include private workplace charging, it's just public. And it's just based on certain assumptions around how people will charge. So if you change some of those assumptions, it changes the number. But it's helpful to see that, yes, we are about 1/4 of the way to the 2030 need as a Bay Area total. And then for those of you who are more visual, I've included this map, which I think is very cool to look at. You can see some interesting clustering. There's some interesting things to observe about like the size of how many DCFC chargers happen to be co-located. Hannah put this map together, and it's just really great. So wanted to share it. Okay, so I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about some of our programs. There's a lot on this slide. I just wanted to show you that we are doing a lot in this space. We are working on a lot of different programs. We've got a bunch of incentive programs, which you can see along the top in blue. Largely, this is to support multifamily EV charging in different ways. Sometimes L1, sometimes L2, sometimes fast charging nearby, different technology approaches. We're trying a lot of these different things through these programs to understand what the costs are, what the challenges are. We've got technical assistance, we've got direct install program, and we've got our GridShift app. So a wide array of programs we're working on. And we've been running these programs for a little while, so we're starting to see some really exciting impacts. We've got 1,300 people using our GridShift charging app, which is amazing. We've got over 20 multifamily sites that we have helped install EV charging, over 300 level 1, level 2 chargers, 14 DC fast chargers, and then a bunch more chargers reserved and in process of being constructed. We've also supported we've enrolled 52 properties in our technical assistance program as well, which is great because we're helping them evaluate their options, think about how they can pursue charging, the incentives that are available. So really excited to see these numbers and to share them with you all. I'm going to highlight 2 programs. The first is our charging incentive program. This is a program that we support both level 1 and level 2 charging at the multifamily properties, depending on what makes sense for the constraints of that property, how they do their parking, what their residents are interested in. And we're really trying to learn and test out what are different approaches that work for both the properties and the tenants so that we can kind of minimize the cost of installing this charging by avoiding distribution system upgrades, transformer upgrades, all these different things. There's different approaches we try to take just to understand how we can most optimally build out this infrastructure, both at these sites and then as we think about scaling that up. One example is Park Plaza in Mountain View. And for them, something that worked was, they installed 22 level 2 chargers and they actually made them available to the public, which not all multifamily properties want to do that. But for them, it works. They're right near a park and a community center, and this allows them to try to get more utilization maybe during the day when tenants aren't there, things like that. So it's an interesting idea, and we were excited to support it. The other program is our GridShift app. This is an app we offer for free to our customers who have electric vehicles. We have contracted with a software vendor to offer this app. They do all the work on the back end to talk to the electric vehicles, to do the optimization to make sure that people, that the cars are being charged when the grid is cleanest and when electricity is cheapest. And so people just plug in, they don't have to think about managing all of this. We do it for them, and we help them lower their bills associated with their EV. Now, I think we may be talking a little bit about this in the next study session as well, but this is kind of on the topic of load. On the left here, you can see this is the duck curve, but the main thing to take away from it is we're seeing more and more renewables on the grid in the middle of the day and generating power that is available. And we also, in the evening, we often see this like ramp that can happen, which is a very sort of steep ramp where we need more and more resources online to deal with the fact that the renewables are no longer there and no longer helping us support the load. And so EV charging can be really important in helping manage that. And so you see on the right, there's a blue line which shows kind of what an average EV charging profile looked like in our territory. And it sort of had this big spike right after midnight. It dropped down. It was pretty flat through the middle of the day, and then it ramped up in the evening. The other line on that chart, the black line, is what happened with our EV charging app. And you can see that in the overnight, it flattened the charging. So we didn't have this kind of peak happening. And it shifted some charging into the middle of the day, which is really exciting because it was able to take advantage of those renewables. And then we've decreased the steepness of the ramp a little bit. So this is just to sort of illustrate that we are seeing these impacts from this program and from the EVs that we're controlling, and it's really exciting. I mean, this is, I think, what we want to be doing is thinking about how we can shift the charging into the times that are optimal. And then as we think about the future and sort of vehicle to grid and batteries that can go both ways, having this kind of control and relationship with these vehicles and with these customers will allow us to leverage the batteries on the vehicles as well. So we have a lot more programs coming. We're trying to expand our reach to different groups, affordable multifamily properties, low-income residents, renters, exciting stuff that some of these the board approved last month with some of the additional funding. So we'll give more updates on this as they advance. And then I wanted to end with, same as last time, just a kind of call to action that we do have a bunch of information that we put in the quarterly report. And that is also located in the CEO report every month in the board packet. So I really encourage you all to look at that, see the updates on the programs, see what kind of uptake is happening, see any qualitative updates that we have. We also have all of our programs on the SVCE website. And then if you have questions or comments or ideas as you're going through that, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat with you. And then we have a great marketing team. We do a lot of work to promote our programs, get them in front of all of our customers, but we always appreciate your help in making sure that your residents are hearing about our programs. So with that, I will stop talking, and we can go to some questions or comments, or I'll turn it back to you, Director Walia.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. You are spot on, 15 minutes, very impressive, and a great, very comprehensive presentation there. It's really fascinating to see the policy work that SVCE is striving towards taking our products across different communities, and not just what we are doing currently, but also you gently remind us of where the gaps are in the future that we can strive towards in our individual cities today and down the road as the technologies evolve and based on the situation changing. One quick comment before we start taking questions. I want to thank the reminder that you have given us, the call to action that we need to reach out to our individual cities. That's very important because that's where we can be your partners in taking all the programs there. Okay, with that, let's take questions. Any takers? Bear Showalter?
Yeah, I was fascinated by that. I just have to say, one of the things I'm really enjoying serving on this board is all the wonderful infographics you put together. They are just spot on. They're great. I love them. You mentioned that we have, or I thought you mentioned that we have about 25% of the public chargers that we think we're going to need in the Bay Area. So are we on track to meet our goal or not on track, or what's happening with that?
Great question. And I'd say I'll flag that was for 2030, which 2035, it's an even higher target for what would be needed there. Yeah, interesting question. I don't know exactly if we're on track or not. I'm looking at Hannah because I'm about to pawn this question over to her to see if she can help. But I will say, one thing that I just want to reiterate is it really depends on, will the future of charging need look exactly like what is modeled? So if we think we need 4 times the number of public charging, but actually we find out that public charging is really effective, we may need more of that and less at-home charging or something like that. And so even that target is a little bit of a moving target, I would say. But yeah. Hannah?
I would also, it's starting off with the trickiest question perhaps, is like forecasting the need of future EV charging. I think it'll be a challenge to get to where we need to go based on the projections that currently exist. There's a couple of newer studies that are coming out as well, trying to analyze this, the changing trends of charging patterns. I'd say we still have a long ways to go, and it's also we need to take into consideration the private shared charging, like at workplaces, as well as all of the need for charging at multifamily. So the public plus all of the private shared charging that'll go in. I think there's a lot to be said about the future of what the new building codes for new construction will be a really big key to the success of getting to where we need to go. But I think we just need to build a lot more charging very quickly.
Okay, and then another hard question, well, maybe not so hard. From stories people tell, I hear that it can be very frustrating to come upon chargers that don't work. So what is what's the status of programs to make sure that these are maintained properly, and so that they do work?
Yeah, another great question and an important one. I think I was actually talking with Hannah about this earlier today, and yeah, we've seen literature showing it was what, 20.
Cool the Earth had a study with UC Berkeley a couple years ago. Maybe you guys have seen it, where they sampled about 600 or 700 chargers in the Bay Area and found that only 72% or so were actually functioning at the time. Pretty stunning indictment of the current state of reliability of the chargers, and certainly top of mind for all of us as we're working on EV charging programs.
Yeah, and so I think that is a key question that is being grappled with both by us and at the state level. There's legislation that we are tracking around this very topic to try to continue to improve the reliability of this and understand how big the issue is and how we might address it. We have also included in our programs more terms and conditions to make sure that there are operations and maintenance contracts in place for the chargers that we are funding, to make sure that we don't get into a place where we've funded something and then 2 years later we find out that that they aren't all working the way that they should be. So it's a really important question. and one that we are actively involved in and trying to understand how we can support our territory.
I might just also add the state is really taking a focus on the reliability as well, and the CEC is now collecting a lot of great data that will hopefully be made public within the next year or so on real reliability stats of these chargers that'll be much more comprehensive than what we've previously been able to access. And there's additional funding streams coming down to help tackle, the chargers that are in place but not functional, and there's a recognized need for funding to be able to retrofit those and make them functional.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that presentation. I thought it was fascinating. Great questions from my colleague. I wanted to follow up on that. When we fund chargers, do we ask that there's some maintenance that happens on those chargers?
Yeah, so for our multifamily charging installation program, for example, we do require that as in terms of accepting these funds, that you will have an operations and maintenance contract in place with the provider.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I'm wondering, I guess to stay on the chargers, how do the chargers in the multifamilies, have we seen any of them with like parking time limits on them? For example, you talked about this one example where they were sharing that. There's a community center next door. Is it shared only maybe during the day, perhaps, where people are working and there's not a great need at the complex itself? Or is that just all the time? Do we see that some of the multi-units are maybe using, off times like this where there's restriction on the use?
Yeah, I think, different properties, depending on the provider, the charging provider, you can kind of set different parameters on when charging might be available to the public versus to residents. And so that is, I think, both a question and something that can be kind of decided at that local level to make sure that the tenants are getting access when they're getting enough access while still trying to take advantage of the ability to offer this to the public.
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking, of renting in New York City and renting in San Francisco. And I mean, sometimes you're just circling around trying to find parking. And so if you have an EV that you need to get charged, I would think that, some of that can be very tricky. And when you talked about that one, I just wondered if that's something that's happening already. I don't know. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask was, I found it very interesting in the appendix, there was a talk about EV adoption varies throughout Santa Clara County, and that there's less that has happened in South and Eastern Santa Clara County. And I wanted to ask if we will use that to emphasize on these specific areas. Are we going to be following the data with that as far as where we're looking to invest in more chargers?
Yeah, I think as we've been rolling out our programs, we are looking at the data to try to understand, where is there need, where are we reaching people, and where are we not reaching people so far, so that we can, increase the kinds of efforts we're making around outreach, around reaching certain specific groups. We have our program for targeted fast charging, where we've identified certain priority zones near clusters of older multifamily housing to see if we can kind of get some fast charging in to support those. And we also looked, as we were doing that, at kind of where is the EV need or the charging need, and where are the deserts today in terms of access to EV charging.
Okay, great. And then my final comment would just be I love the e-bikes. So thank you.
Thank you. Next is Vice Chair Tyson, who is here virtually for questions.
I'm from Colorado, and so thanks for the presentation. It was full of the information. The grid shift program, is that focused on residential only?
Yes.
Okay, because this whole discussion about how many chargers we need, it strikes me that the more successful grid shift is, the more chargers we need. because the more likely we are to have people trying to charge at the same time. And I just wonder if we're going to need more sophisticated ways, because it may be advantageous for us to have somebody charge at a worse time at home rather than clog up the charging infrastructure at either work or some other public location.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about that. I mean, with the app, we're really focused on managing the at-home charging, which, as you saw, like we were able to do some shifting, away from the simultaneous peak, which is important as we think about distribution impacts, and then into the middle of the day, which is great from a utilization of renewables standpoint. But yeah, the more we can enroll people in grid shift, the more they want to charge at home, let's say, the more we are maybe moving them away from public charging or workplace charging, which is very much coincident with midday when renewables are out there on the grid and are kind of available to charge. So yeah, I think you've hit on that there is this sort of question of the future here on, well, what do we want optimally? And I think we are trying a variety of approaches, frankly, on this front, including managing this charging at home, to try to help us understand what is the flexibility, what is the potential, so that as we try to scale this up at a 4x, 10x, whatever we're headed towards, we're kind of picking the winner, picking the right thing to back here as much as we can with the data that we have. So that's sort of what we're testing today, is exactly the answer to that question.
Very good, thank you.
Mayor Mohan?
Yeah, my question was about the assistance that I think you call it the Future Fit program. And you talked about helping to install EV chargers in multifamily dwellings. So in a practical sense, how does that work? Do you go directly to the developers or the owners, or do you come through the city? Because I don't know, and maybe I just don't know if our city is actively involved in doing this with the many developments that are sort of happening in our city now. We have several of these, and it would be good to have EV chargers. I mean, they talk about it, but I'm not sure we talk about the assistance that you provide. How does that work?
And we would always love for you to help connect us to anyone that you find in your city. If you're like, oh, hey, you find out that there's some developments and you want to make sure that they're aware of us, of our program, please do connect us. But I'm going to ask Hannah to share. She leads the technical assistance program, so she can say kind of how we've been marketing it to date.
Yeah, so our Future Fit Assist program is our no-cost technical assistance program that we offer to multifamily property owners, but it's also available for small commercial properties, small, medium businesses, as well as public agencies that have taken advantage of it previously. This program is one pathway to getting in an EV charging installation. So some folks are maybe starting earlier in the journey and are just not sure where to even begin. And this is the program for them, because they can go enroll in this program and basically have a full concierge service helping them plan these different types of projects, helping them talk about their different options, understand the different charging needs of their property, and will really help them design different solutions based on their site-specific property, and then deliver some reports and even help them get bids and understand their bids. So it's one pathway, and even connect to incentive programs. So it's really marketed directly to property owners who are interested in adding EV charging. And so we have a variety of different types of marketing tactics that we're trying, emails, social media, advertisements, as well as even some phone calls out. But it's always helpful, as Justin said, if there are specific properties you have in mind, to let them know about this program.
Yeah, I can see that if the same information is available at the city planning department, or so that would be another sort of source of information that developers or owners can get. My other question was, I'm not sure I saw this slide. This was sort of your first or second slide, where you talked about residential units I know the focus was on electric vehicles and so on, but you talked about residential units, only 1% of residential units using electricity. Did I misread that chart? Or
Which slide was it? Could we go?
it was sort of the second or the third, so I didn't keep track of the number.
The pie chart.
Or maybe it was a pie chart.
emissions, I
Yeah.
think, of electricity, maybe.
Oh, was
It
it the
was sort
pie
of
chart?
early on. Yeah,
The
I think
pie
it was a
chart?
pie
Okay.
chart.
The
okay,
residential
that's the one.
buildings, electricity, 1%. Yeah. So this pie chart is showing emissions of the overall SVCE territory. And so when you add up, all of the very small emissions that are associated with providing electricity to residential buildings in our territory, that adds up to about 1% of all total emissions in our territory. Did that answer your question?
Oh, so it's related to the emissions.
Yes. Yeah, this
Okay.
isn't consumption. This is GHG emissions.
Okay. All right. Got it. And my last question was about the app that you talked about, Grid Shift. Is that what? How would one know about this? If I bought an electric vehicle, where would I get that?
Yeah, we do a bunch of outreach through email, through ad campaigns. We've had ads in the local DMV offices, so we try to kind of find how might we find where people who have cars are going to come across it, and then we try to get that in front of them.
And do they buy it from you?
We offer it free for them,
Oh,
so we cover the cost
for everyone.
for all of our customers. Yeah, any customer who wants to take advantage of it, and so we've reached about 1,300 folks so far.
That's pretty neat. Thank you. Those were my questions.
Thank you for your comments. I have been jotting some things down, so just bear with me. I'm changing protocol. I agree with her. That was one of the things I had written. Please reach out to the community development departments in each city, because with all the RENA allocations and all the projects that are coming across different cities starting now, there is a lot of opportunity for you to reach the developers. Okay, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah,
What's your
sorry. I just
question?
wanted to make a plug. It was a great tee up for me to just remind everyone that we also, yes, we have funding set aside for affordable housing new construction. It's like $7 million in incentives set aside for affordable housing new construction across our territory to help support the installation of EV charging in compliance with any local codes. So yes, if there are new projects coming, please make sure, especially if they're affordable housing, that they're looking at our program. Most of the rest of the incentives for the program are targeted more towards existing buildings
Okay.
or existing multifamily.
Okay, wonderful. I will again say we don't get to know at the early stages when most of the planning is being done as city council members. So really the place for you to send your information is to make sure that the community development departments are fully aware of it. And my suggestion would be to keep on sending them reminders, because different cities will get projects at different stages. So intermittent reminders would be good for them because they're dealing with a lot there. And my other quick comment on the pie chart thing is, so essentially the other areas are areas of opportunity for us to reduce the greenhouse gases in the pie chart that Director Mohan was talking about, since the emissions
Yes.
from residential is only 1%. So essentially what we're looking at is capturing so many other areas where we can gradually reduce the greenhouse gases.
Yeah, I mean, the residential emissions associated with fossil fuel burning appliances in the home are, a much bigger portion than this tiny wedge of the electricity emissions, which are going to continue to get smaller as the overall grid continues to get cleaner. So
Okay.
I think, the focus today is really just on the residential vehicle portion of that. And last time we talked about the natural gas wedge.
Yes. Thank you. I'll hold off my questions, and Director Makachuk.
Hi, great presentation. I really like the data that's in it. If you could put up a couple of the slides and we could just go through, please. This is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, is Hannah knows, since we had quite a conversation before this meeting about EV charging. Can you put the slides up? I'll just give you a little bit of insight, and I'll start by where's the barriers to entry?
Which slide are you looking for?
You had something on what the barriers to adoption.
Oh, this.
Okay. So EV costs, lack of home charging. If you look in the lack of home charging, Pacific Gas and Electric makes it very difficult to put a charger in a level 2. They want to know what the load is. And there's all kinds of work that they have to do. So they have to reduce their cycle time to getting that done. I'm sorry, but and then the whole billing side, they've got to get a little sharper at doing that. Can you go back a slide, please? This is interesting. I really like the data. And you look and you see, look at all the Teslas. Well, Tesla's got a tremendous amount of functionality in their cars. And I'm not sure that does grid shift duplicate that functionality. And to some extent, I think it does. But there's an opportunity there. Go back one more slide, please. Where's the one with the usage and the duck curve? Go to the duck curve. How about that?
Go to the duck curve.
Our friend, the duck curve.
There you go.
Okay, so if you look at let me give you the mindset of someone that charges every day. You see it at midnight how it spikes up. That's because it's all driven by rates. And the cheap rates start at midnight, and they have nothing to do with the carbon in that electricity. And what you do is you say, okay, I've got an electric vehicle, I want it charged. Whatever I used yesterday or today, I want it to replace that for tomorrow. And the cheap charging starts at midnight, so I have set my charging to start at 12:30 p.m. or a.m. Okay? It just does that all the time, and it goes until it's charged. Then it stops. That's why you see that really steep drop off. Tesla is changing their functionality, and we've got more Tesla vehicles. They move the needle, right? And what they're starting to do is say, what time are you going to leave in the morning? So if you're going to leave at 8 a.m., depending on how much charge you need, it will start going backwards from 8 a.m., okay? So there's a big opportunity there that's going to happen. And then, so I covered that. I think there's a big opportunity to partner with Tesla and get them to understand, how SVCE could partner with them to get some of their messages across, but also to get some more functionality. So, for example, I didn't know, or I should have known that the amount of carbon is what I want to reduce at the same price, right? So my rate, I want to charge as late. Where's the bottom part? You see in the flat part of the curve there, between 10 and 3 o'clock, 3:30, in that range. I need to move my charging later to the extent that my lifestyle can support that. If I've got to drive to work, I don't have the choice, right? But I need to be able to understand that it's the same price between midnight and on your EV2 rate and 3 p.m., right? So, but the later you do it, the less carbon there is. So anyways, I could go on and on,
No,
but
it's
I
really
think
interesting stuff.
I think there's a ton of opportunities in here, and I think if you go back to the pie chart, right? Where's our friend the pie that you were looking at? I think two more, one more. There. The residential vehicle gasoline, 36%. To the extent that we can move the needle on that, that's a huge amount of the pie. Anyways,
Yep. No.
it's all good, and we can talk offline.
Yeah, and I think you covered a lot of really good stuff there. I do just want to highlight that what you described is essentially what the GridShift app does and has been doing since 2019 for customers, is saying, hey, we know that the price is sort of all equal after midnight because that's the super off-peak for the EV rate, let's say. And so, yeah, I think the blue line that you see here, again, 75% of our customers, or 75% of the electric vehicles are Teslas. You can imagine that that is basically, that is showing you that a lot of people that have Teslas, I would presume, were setting their cars to charge right after midnight because that's when the rate changed. And then you saw this big spike, it went down. With the app, we were able to say, you give it to ready by time, we charge kind of backwards from that point based on the price is the same, when are the lowest emissions. And so that's exactly what the goal has been with this. We are also kind of looking into and thinking about how might we get into dynamic pricing, and there's additional signals that we can send about, hey, the grid is particularly constrained right now, can you please shift your charging? So totally hear you. I think it's a rousing success if Tesla does roll those kinds of features out, because then we won't need to be offering this for that portion of customers. It'll just be happening, and we're hoping that we're kind of demonstrating it here with some of this. So really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Director Rennie next.
I wanted to focus a little bit on the adoption part of the plan. As I've said before, I take my Bolt for long drives. I drove it to Vegas in January, and I drive to San Diego and so forth. So I see other people out trying to charge, and since I have a Bolt, I have to go find an EVgo or Electricity America or ChargePoint. I got all the apps going. Which one's the optimal one to go to? And I've got my apps, and I've got all my little cards that I could use if the app's not working because there isn't connections. And you got to have a lot of backup to make this work. But what I wanted what I noticed this year, really in the last year, for a long time, really people that are driving are early adopters, and they're willing to change their behavior to make this work, right? That's planning ahead. It's knowing, I want to let my car run to zero because I can't just pop into a gas station. It's, I need to make sure it charges tonight kind of thing. But what I'm starting to see and Tesla made it really easy because they had a charging network that the car will go find. It works every time. There isn't a bunch of, well, I'm at a different one and I don't have the right card or the right app, or it's not working for some reason, or it's not compatible with my car, and why is that guy's working on it and didn't work when I tried it? And, there's a lot of that going on. As we're now, the EVs are starting to spread to other brands. I'm seeing people in the ID4s and these other types of cars out there showing up thinking like it's a gas station, right? They're low on charge and they haven't really planned ahead a lot. And I think, I always thought, well, people are going to change to driving electric cars if we could get them to just think like us early adopters planning ahead. So the one thing that I liked hearing was you were talking about trying some DC fast chargers near these multifamily units rather than trying to build them out, because people have been driving for 20 years or 30 years. They think like a gas station mentality, and I would be curious to see if those drive adoption better from this group of people that are not really the early adopters and are kind of not willing to easily think in a different way about this. So I kind of wanted to point that out, and I'm curious to see what kind of data comes from it.
Yeah, thanks. We are too. I think it's going to be interesting to see, does that work for these folks? And I think you've hit on the question that we talk about often is, hey, what has worked for folks so far? Is it going to be the solution for these other populations that maybe aren't the early adopters and what they need? So really, really good points.
Okay, thanks. With that, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll make a couple of quick comments and a couple of questions. Firstly, it's really good to see that the Santa Clara County is leading in this area. No surprise, but it's good to always note that. Still have a long way to go, as you keep on gently reminding us so many times, which means our work, SVCE team, as well as our work as council members in our own cities, needs to continue. and great partnership, great collaboration with SVCE. I can personally say it just took me a couple of years in my city to get them, just a couple of years, to get them to actually start putting the marketing materials on our website on the landing page. But it finally happened. That's the good news. Pam's social media posts have been going, but we know that, like every other city in Saratoga as well, different residents can be reached in different ways. To have it on our website, which has been updated, is huge. I have personally been noticing that. So that's where one of my thoughts was the CDD part, the Community Development Department, and as Mayor Mohan said, that's an important area. One, I'll just add a couple of questions right here in the interest of time. Have we considered the population growth that's going to happen over the course of time as we are doing the planning in terms of shifting? Because of the extra housing coming in, there is going to be denser housing. The nature of housing is changing. That's one of my, not necessarily have to answer this, but just a point to make, as well as when you talked about both the reliability. Well, when you talked about the reliability, Hannah, my one question was of the EV chargers. Is there any data on the split of the type of chargers, whether it is type 1, 2, or fast chargers? Because the price point varies dramatically. If you want to answer that, then I'll piggyback on Rob's question here.
Was your question on the pricing difference between those
No,
three?
I know
or
the pricing.
Reliability differences. There are a variety of differences in not only the speed of charging, but even the charging networks that they're on. For example, like Tesla is notorious, or has one of the best reliabilities compared to a lot of these others. So there are differences among them. In terms of, is level 2 or level 3 more or less reliable? I'm not sure if I've seen data on that, but it will be coming. As I said, the CEC is collecting a lot of data on reliability of chargers now, starting January 1st of this year. And so a lot of that data will be coming in public reports.
Okay, that'll be great. The reason to me that's important is the fact that at multifamily, because of the price difference, at multifamily, I am really excited to see that idea from Mountain View that you presented earlier, that they're making it available to the public, because that makes it financially feasible. One of the challenges with the fast chargers is it is so much more expensive. I know in Saratoga we couldn't do it. We decided to just plan for it in terms of putting the conduit because we were doing some other work. But the reliability factor combined with the idea, that Mountain View idea, could be something that could be presented. Again, going back to where the design is happening, which is the Community Development Department. The developers are interacting there the most. That's where you're going to get the most bang for the buck. And we will continue to send the message as you keep on sending it to us. So those are just some of my thoughts in terms of bringing the policy together. As you yourself said, even for the grid shift, that we are expanding the reach to different groups, and that varies across the territory. Okay, last call for other questions. Go ahead, Rob.
If I could just add one thing that I think could affect, and I'll just put it in your mind. I don't know how much you can affect, but I'll give it a perfect example. I was in Las Vegas. They're really short on chargers there. I pulled up to, I think there was 5 Electricity America chargers. They were all full, and there was 5 cars waiting. So I was sixth in line. So I waited 45 minutes before I could get to a charger. On one of the chargers, there's a guy driving a pizza car or something, and the charge rate charges really fast from about 1/4 to 3/4, and then it really slows down. He sat there until his car was 98% full, and there's people there waiting to get on the chargers. If there's some way to encourage the companies to put some rules around that, to turn it over, because there's people showing up in their new cars and they're like, what, I gotta wait? And like I said, I waited 45 minutes before I started my charge. So that can deter people. but things like making sure people are more efficient about their charging, or maybe chargers that won't charge your car past 80% or something like that. Or maybe it's tied to the other four that are next to it, and if they're all full, it won't let you go past 80. But thinking about things like that that make it less painful to new people that are maybe less patient than me. I just pull out, my computer and start doing work or something, but others, it might deter them and give bad word to, spread bad, oh, don't get electric car, I had all of these, painful experiences kind of thing.
Yeah, I think both the reliability issues and the long line waiting at the chargers, like these are all challenges that I think folks who are not early adopters, who are not going to be patient to wade through that, we need to really make sure that this feels as kind of seamless and easy as possible to make this transition. So yeah, I hadn't thought of some of those points, but I wrote them down. And Director Wally, I just want to address one thing you said, and then I'll be my last word. You mentioned kind of the population growth, and so I do want to flag that we don't have our own sort of model showing exactly how many EV chargers we think are needed. We look at some of these state models, we try to understand what's gone into them. We can try to think about what it means for our local area. They do account for population growth, I believe, and as Hannah mentioned, the state building code and a lot of the REACH codes that our cities adopted on the EV side, those are all going to help as the new housing is built. Those will have chargers available at the properties, which is the cheapest time to build the charging. So like on the policy side, we're in good, much better shape as we're looking forward on the population growth.
Oh, wonderful. Good to hear. Thank you once again to both of you, Justin and Hannah. Great work, and this is where we can all continue to make good progress.
We do have a public comment.
Public comment.
Thank you. Let's open for public comment on this item.
Okay, done in person and online, we have Bruce Carney. Bruce, whenever you're ready, we'll have 3 minutes.
Hello. Thank you to Justin and Hannah for an excellent presentation. I wanted to add a few additional thoughts. The first one is about if we want to quadruple the number of charging stations, then charging needs to be an attractive business to be in. It's very capital intensive. You put your money down up front and you get paid over a period of years through rather modest per kilowatt hour charges. And as far as I know, there are about 5 or 6 major national brands, and I am not aware that any of them are doing very well financially. And so I think this is something that the board needs to learn more about, and I would certainly love to learn more about it myself. Another thing I would mention is that as someone who mostly charges at home on a 120 volt circuit, I'm pretty price sensitive. My marginal cost to charge my car, to do anything with electricity, is about 62 cents a kilowatt hour. And for the last 10 years, the city of Mountain View's chargers in their community center and garages charge 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So I am an eager plugger in to the Mountain View subsidized charging network. And I think it would also be interesting to know how other SVCE cities charge financially for the electricity that they might provide in city managed chargers. And what is the right price? Well, if you're in the business of charging, you want to have exactly the experience that Director Rennie talked about. You want to have every charger busy. You want to have customers who are willing to wait so that your utilization rate is as high as possible. But that, as he said, can discourage new adoption of EVs, because that's worse than being in a gas station, except during one of the OPEC oil embargoes back in the 70s. The pricing of gasoline is widely advertised in bright glowing colors, but if you were driving by Mountain View City Hall, you would have no idea that there was 20 cents a kilowatt hour electricity in the basement. And other chargers might be charging 40 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour, but until you get up there right next to them, you'll never know. And some even have time rates that vary based on time of day, as well they should, because electricity costs less and at certain times of day. One last topic is that cars like mine, a 6-year-old Bolt, can't charge any faster than at 50 kilowatts, but there are some cars that can now accept charge at 350 kilowatts. The existence of super fast charging like that really changes the landscape of where chargers should be. Should they be in dwelling places? Should they be in grocery store parking lots? Or should they be in workplace parking lots? It's a lot to unpack, and I hope that in a future presentation it will all be unpacked for you. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Bruce. Once again, it's good to have an engaged resident. Any other public comments, Andrea? Seeing none, I am going to close this item. Once again, thanks to Justin and Hannah. And we're going to move to the next item tonight, study session and update on load forecasting efforts. Mauron Wenzel, our Director of Regulatory Policy and Planning, and Jessica Feng, Power Resources Planner, will be presenting. Welcome, Mauron and Jessica. Just a reminder to all of us, we are running just a little bit behind schedule if you want to end at 9 p.m. No rule to, but just, it's fascinating subject. Just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. Okay, Mauron, yours.
All right, thank you. I'll try to be quick and less interesting than Justin was. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about load forecasting. Just to give you a sense of what I'm hoping to go through this evening. So we're hoping that you all walk away with a better understanding of what our forecast really is, how we develop it, what the primary use cases are, and also some of the key policies that we think are going to drive our forecast over the forecast horizon. As far as how I'm hoping to go through this evening, there's some key terms that I want to go through. We'll talk about why we forecast, how we forecast, and get to our current forecast results, and then wrap up with a little bit about where we're going with our forecast in the future. All right, so as I was putting this presentation together, I was trying to avoid using too much jargon, but I realized I wasn't going to be able to avoid that. So I wanted to take just a minute or two to walk through some phrases that you might hear me say tonight. So the first thing that I probably am going to say is baseline. And so when I'm talking about our baseline forecast, I really mean what we think of our traditional normal electricity use for buildings. So it's sort of our forecast minus the impact of load modifiers. And when I'm talking about load modifiers, I'm really talking about some of the big key drivers of our changing load. And so these are things like energy efficiency, electric vehicles, behind-the-meter PV, behind-the-meter storage, and building electrification. And I'll try to say all of those terms out loud, but I apologize if I use the acronyms as I go through this. Another thing that you might hear Jessica and I talk about a little bit is IPER. And IPER is the California Energy Commission's Integrated Energy Policy Report. And part of the IPER that we utilize quite a bit is electricity demand forecasts that they produce as part of the report. And it's really the state's de facto outlook for what we think is going to happen to all of California's electricity demand. So it gets used by a number of agencies, including the California ISO, the CPUC, the CEC itself. Really, anytime the state needs a forward look of what they think electricity demand will be, they'll use that IPER forecast. So it's something we benchmark ourselves to. Another thing I'll say probably is 8760. So that's the number of hours in a non-leap year. And so when I'm talking about 8760 forecasts, it's really a forecast that identifies the load at any given hour in that year. So this is something new that we can do at SVCE. So now I can go to Jessica and ask her, on April 10th, 2035 at 8 o'clock at night, how much EV do we think will be on our system? And she can tell me that. So it's a lot of granularity and has a lot of really useful things that we can do with that now. Finally, I wanted to point out that there are short-term forecasts that are used for day-ahead or week-ahead scheduling. They get used a lot in the energy markets with our scheduling coordinator, CAISO, folks like that. What I'm talking about this evening is really long-term forecasts. So short-term forecasting is really important, but out of scope for what we're talking about tonight. All right, so with that, we can get into why we forecast. And fundamentally, forecasting really allows us insight into our expected progress towards decarboning the SVCE territory. And it lets us do some really cool things because we can now better understand our load and how programs like grid shift or anything like that can help us impact our load. And so we can ask questions like, if we shift our EV, how does that impact GHG forecasting, GHG emissions in our service territory going forward? We can ask questions about the value of behind the meter storage and solar, or just a solar only unit. So there's a lot of sort of thought we can do on our programs now, I think. I also wanted to point out that there's a lot baked into this forecast that SVCE really doesn't have a lot of control over. So later this evening, I'll talk about how we developed our EV forecast. And one of the big assumptions baked into that is that we assume that the internal combustion engine ban that's currently expected in 2035 is going to come to fruition. If for any reason a big policy like that changes, our forecast is going to change pretty significantly. So there's a number of these big state policies that we assume in this forecast. If they change, it could really change our forecast. There's also some more practical reasons why we have to do this forecast. A lot of our planning efforts rely on knowing what our customers' demand is going to look like in the future. So we have a number of internal use cases. First of all, and sometimes I'll also refer to this as the operating forecast, our operating forecast feeds into the finance and power supply teams, so they need to know what our outlook is for all of their models. Jessica's also in the process right now of creating a number of forecast sensitivities, and that allows us to think about the risks around our finances and power supply outlook. And it also allows us now to ask some of those questions about the value of demand modification or potentially changing rate design to incentivize customers to use load at different hours. There's also some even more practical purposes in that we have some compliance requirements associated with our forecast. So this forecast will get sent to a number of regulators for different purposes. It goes to the CPUC to help develop their resource adequacy forecast. So our resource adequacy requirements are largely driven by what we submit. The CEC uses this forecast to help inform the IPER forecast. And we also submit this forecast to PG&E because they use it for what is called the ERA forecast, or the Energy Resource Recovery Account, which directly influences what the PCIA is going to look like for the following year. I wanted to wrap up this section on why we forecast with a quote that modelers and planners like to use a lot. Here it's attributed to George Box, who I believe was a statistician. And the quote is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is something we like to say because it sort of gives us coverage when our models are wrong, but also because it's really, the point here isn't that we necessarily think that the forecast we've provided is going to come to fruition or be perfect, but that it allows us good insights and allows us to think through risks associated with our portfolio and what might be on the horizon. So this graphic here, I'll just walk through it very quickly, shows the IPER forecast for the CAISO coincident peak from 2017 to 2022. And if you look at the 2030 values, you see that from 2017 in that black line, we expected about 45,000 megawatts at the peak. And 5 years later, that number had jumped up to over 50,000 megawatts. So forecasts can be quite volatile, but hopefully this is representative of forecasters who are taking in more and more data, more and more insights, and getting to something that's more and more likely as we go into the future. So with that, we can talk a little bit about how we forecast. And I'll start by saying that this forecasting function is pretty new to SVCE. We hired Jessica last year. She's been a great addition, and I think adding this function as an internal function really raises our analytical capabilities and skill set. So traditionally, we've used a third-party forecaster, and what they would provide was monthly sales volume and monthly peaks. So it got us through our compliance filings. It was still useful for all of the modeling efforts we needed to do. But what we have now is a much greater granularity of forecasting. So we now forecast each class, residential, commercial, lighting, all of that stuff, and each load modifier separately. And then, as I mentioned before, we now have those full 8760 shapes, so we can really think through the impacts of all of those modifiers and how we can potentially change them over time. As far as the methodology, I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail, but just want to give you a sense of what kind of inputs go into our models. And if you have more specific questions, Jessica's here to answer those for you because I probably don't know the answers. Really what we take is all of our historic data, so all of our customer data from the last 5 years. And by the way, that's part of the reason why we, up until this year, didn't have this as an internal function. We really needed that historical data in order to do this function in-house. So it's only recently that it really made sense to bring it in-house. But we take the historical data, you normalize it for weather, so you actually want to pull the effects of weather out of the forecast. And then for the baseline load growth, we rely very heavily on economic projections. So we take Moody's Analytics outlooks for Santa Clara County and integrate that to determine our baseline load growth. All of our load modifiers are informed by both subject matter experts within SVCE and also information from IPER forecasters and other forecasters, as well as insights that we find through research. The models themselves, they're statistic forecasting models, and then for the modifiers, they actually get forecast separately. Each modifier has a slightly different model, but it's some version of trying to assess what future adoption will look like. With that, I wanted to really quickly jump into just one load modifier as an example of how we think through these issues. So conveniently for our last conversation, we'll look here at electric vehicles. So some of the inputs we think about are, for instance, our historic adoption rates, right? If you think back at Justin's graphic where it showed that we were pretty far ahead of the rest of California, we take that into consideration. As I mentioned, we think about those policies like the internal combustion engine bans for California, plug that in. We ask questions about where will our chargers be, how flexible do we think load can be, and then there's a number of other assumptions, right? You have to estimate how many miles an EV is going to drive on average, how many kilowatt hours it needs to charge, all of that good stuff. All of that information gets tossed into a model that does a logistic regression, creates what we call an S-curve, which is a sort of standard adoption that we see across really all kinds of consumer adoption. So it's called an S-curve because it makes a nice little S. And then what we get for an output is that by 2045, we expect over 20% of our load to be attributed to electric vehicles. And what that means in maybe more concrete terms is that we expect that for our service territory, there'll be about 1.9 electric vehicles per residential account. I don't want to walk through that process for each load modifier, so I just want to give some highlights. We sort of already went over EVs. Building electrification, we think we have a pretty aggressive but reasonable outlook for our building electrification. So by the end of the decade, we're assuming that all new build will have electric heat and water, and then we're assuming roughly 5,000 electric heat pump water heater replacements. And there's also some additional other building electrification that's baked into that as well that we just didn't call out explicitly here. Behind the meter PV, where we land by the end of the forecast horizon is roughly a 50% increase relative to today. So we expect 25% of homes and roughly 8% of commercial accounts to have behind the meter PV by 2050. So with that, I think we can get to our results. And so the high-level takeaway really from this whole presentation is that by 2050, we expect our load forecast to increase roughly 45% relative to today. And load modifiers are really what's driving that story. So I'll quickly walk through this graphic. That red line that we see at the beginning from 2018 to 2023, that was our actual load. So that's all the historic data that we put into the model. The green line is weather normalized, so that's that same load once we adjust for the impact of weather, and that's really the basis, the base data that we use to develop the forecast. The yellow line there represents our baseline load growth. So to the extent that increases, that's largely being driven by macroeconomic trends for the service territory. And then all of the gap there between the yellow line and the blue line, which is our total sales volume, that's driven by all of those load modifiers, the behind-the-meter PV, electric vehicles, and building electrification. So as you can see, it's really the key thing driving our load growth in the future. In the slide after this one, I'm going to walk you through how each of those load modifiers impact that graphic. But first, I wanted to pause for a moment and just talk through the way different load modifiers impact the load. So I think it's relatively intuitive that electric vehicles and building electrification are increasing our load. We also model behind-the-meter storage. And because behind-the-meter storage has round-trip efficiency losses, essentially for every kilowatt hour you put in, you get slightly less, about 85% back out because of the efficiency losses. Behind-the-meter storage actually counts as a slight increase to our load, which you'll see on the next slide. And then, of course, there's things that decrease our load. Behind-the-meter PV, of course, our customers are using the energy that they generate, but since this goes into financial models and goes to help our procurement team figure out what they need to procure, we think of behind-the-meter PV as decreasing our load, it's decreasing our sales. And then, of course, energy efficiency also brings down load over time as we get better appliances. So with that background, I will quickly walk you through this. I apologize, this graphic's a little confusing, but hopefully it's useful nonetheless. So once again, our yellow line here is our baseline sales. You can then jump up to the dotted, I guess it looks pretty purple here, and that is the impacts of EVs. So just from the blue to the dotted purple is all EV impact. From there, we jump up to the orange line, the dashed orange line, and that shows the difference between EVs, it shows the additional impact of building electrification. As you can see, the blue line adds storage to that. Storage is really a very small impact on an aggregate basis, and I think more interesting on a daily basis. And that really shows the sort of peak consumption for our customers. From there, you jump down to that teal line there, and that shows the reduction because of behind-the-meter PV. And then finally, if you jump down to the dark blue line, that adds the energy efficiency, and that dark blue line then represents our total system sales. The last big thing I want to point out on our results is that because so much of our new load growth is being driven by these demand modifiers, and we expect a lot of that to impact the residential side of our service territory, we're going to see a shift in how our sales are dispersed across commercial, industrial, and residential classes. So today, SVCE has only about 30% of our sales are from the residential classes, and we're going to see that increase to over 40% by 2045. So a pretty meaningful shift in that way. And just very quickly, I'll wrap up by letting you know about some of the things we're planning on doing going forward with this forecast. So as I mentioned, this is our first time doing a forecast in-house. So we are currently running our new forecast through our financial models. I jumped ahead. We're currently developing some financial risk assessments. So Jessica's working on developing some scenarios, and she'll come back, or maybe just Amrit will come back at the June meeting to talk through some of those. We are also assessing how our new forecast impacts our long-term finance and power supply outlook. And then finally, we're hoping to help develop some tools to support virtual power plant evaluation as well as real-time pricing evaluation efforts. Finally, I think this is a process of continuous improvement and always refining your assumptions in the forecast. One of the things that stuck out at me from the last discussion on EVs is we really need a lot of good data in order to have a good forecast. And so many of these technologies, whether they're behind the meter storage or understanding what EV shapes will look like, rely on having a more robust data set. And so I think there's a lot more analysis we can do there to improve the outlook for some of that. The other thing I'll point out here is that so far we are not including any climate change impacts in our forecast. That's something that the IPER forecasters relatively recently started doing. And I think something where we definitely want to look at for next year. It's probably something that is very real, but once again, we don't know that the data out there to back any climate change assumptions will be accurate enough for us to want to put in the forecast. So with that, I will pause and turn it back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Marin, and thank you, Jessica. So it's a good reminder that this is such a key function to have the load forecasting because it ties into everything, fundamentally the financial modeling as well and the risk assessment for the organization as such. And I appreciate you making this somewhat dry material, at least for me, I'll be frank. You presented it in a manner which is a lot more let's just say understandable for me. I'm not an engineer, so I'll just say that. And the fact that you have to stay nimble with all the forecasting in terms of what kind of data you can get and what are the variables that are changing, it just highlights once again the great work that your team is doing. And for that, I want to thank you. And we'll quickly take comments. And I do want to say earlier on that remark about taking longer was not directed at you. It was more for us. We got so engaged in the policy discussion that the board took longer. Okay, Director Rennie.
Just a quick thought. Your yellow line is not flat, so maybe it's kind of included, but I think something to keep an eye on is AI because it's pretty computing intensive, and so far, we're not noticing it. It might be at a server farm somewhere, but like as Microsoft starts talking about embedding it all across their suite that might be running on your local computer, now it may not be just server farms where the power, there may be more power other places. And I think we're still a little bit early, but you're looking out a long distance, and that might be something you might want to consider or keep an eye on. Is it actually going to be a bigger step than we might be considering?
Yeah, if I can respond quickly to that, I think it's an excellent point and something we've been thinking about. And that particular scenario pops up as one of our risk forecasts that I think you'll see in a couple months. Those big sort of chunky loads, like adding a big data farm, it's hard to forecast those, but definitely a risk that I think we're thinking about as AI takes off here. So very good point.
Thank you. Director Meadows.
Thank you for the presentation. So I used to do some forecasting in my time, never of load. But, and afterwards I can ask anybody who's interested, but I won't say now. So that was very interesting. So I'm wondering, so as you're really undertaking this for the beginning, and I understand the process of each year you're going to sort of do a new forecast, but how do you plan on checking the accuracy of the forecast that you've done as you complete each year, looking at which assumptions bore out and which didn't, which then should, if we can make good revised assumptions, might help the accuracy in the future? How do you plan on cross-checking results?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly you can cross-check from the most recent year, but most of the risk and uncertainty is further out in the forecast horizon. So I think some of it is doing those checks on how we forecast recently, and I think there's some efforts being done between Jessica and the DPP data team to do some of that work. As I noted, we also check our forecasts against the IPER forecast, so that's another place to just sort of check, Are we roughly on track with them? Do we understand where we differ in our assumptions, and are we comfortable with that? So that's another way that we're working on it. But I think probably an area where there's more room for us to think on it. It's a very good comment, something we'll take back.
And since I didn't ask any questions last time, can I ask one more?
Absolutely.
I saved them for this one. So this is sort of about one of the assumptions. I was a little surprised on slide 10. I think some of it is driven, some of your assumptions about how EV and building electrification and PV are going to change over time. Some of it's driven by regulation. But I was really surprised that we're actually, 2050, we're expecting every household essentially to have nearly two EVs, and yet we're only expecting a quarter of homes to have PV. So I thought that was kind of an interesting contrast. Obviously, regulation has some effect, but why else is PV going to be so low?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things baked into that. The PV is probably low in part because we are assuming that the new net billing tariff will be in effect, so we'll be under, sometimes called NEM 3, not NEM 2 rules. I think the other thing about EVs, and maybe this was another thing that I should have highlighted as a potential room for improvement or change in the future, is we are currently only modeling light-duty EVs. And so we don't have the medium and heavy duty fleet modeled. And so some of that, I think, that 1.9 is maybe to some extent a proxy for some of that commercial EV use as well.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Can I add the comment?
Go ahead, CEO Padilla.
Thank you.
And then I'll take public comment.
Sure. Well, I was very excited about this, by the way. And so one of the first things that I did when I joined SVCE 6 years ago was just say, Garish, we need to bring this in-house. This is such an important function. And it's one that I did in a previous role when I was at the city of Palo Alto. So I understood how important it was and how complicated it could be. But being in the city of Palo Alto and working with only one city and one development department, we had really close connections to our city development department. And so we were able to get information from the city itself in terms of new development, new construction, new big projects that were being happen or rezoning. I think eventually this ties back to some of the discussions or some of the points that you made, Chair Walea. It would be nice for us to create a system where we can also get information from your cities on some of these big impactful growths. We know that down in Gilroy, they're planning a big new construction of some housing, which has the potential to really change our load projection too. So we'll work with the cities through other means to try to figure out how we can make that dialogue happen so that we can be alerted, not just for trying to fund programs like electric vehicles or other things, but also to help it in our planning as well.
You bring up a great point. Two-way communication sounds very simple, but
Yes.
is critical and often doesn't happen. I think we should definitely work towards that to find a way where the cities can feed that information into SVCE rather than only SVCE reaching out to the cities.
Great.
So thank you so much for that. Okay, we have one more question here. Is everyone okay if we go a little past 9 p.m.? I just wanted to do a quick check-in. Are we all fine? This is a very interesting conversation, a bit packed agenda. If you're fine. Okay, one more question. Brian Mekchek.
Are you modeling for any growth or changes with microgrids? I see that as kind of something that's happening in the future and don't know if that's on your radar or not.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're not currently modeling for microgrids. There's a microgrids proceeding at the CPUC that we aren't fully staffing, but we are monitoring. And I think where we're seeing most of those conversations happening are in more rural areas. So I think if it seems through that proceeding like there might be more microgrids popping up in more urban and dense environments like the service territory we represent, that's probably something that we would circle back on and whether or not we need to think about that more closely.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have public comment on this? Seeing none, I'd like to close this item, and we'll move on to the last item for tonight's agenda. That's Building Electrification Policy Update, and we'll have Zoe Elizabeth, Deputy Director of Decarbonization Programs and Policy, presenting. Zoe has been working with all the directors and the staff in each of the cities. So we're looking forward to where Zoe is today.
Good evening. And I believe that my colleague Tony Yulo is also online in case questions come up that are most appropriate for him to answer. Okay, so we've heard about ways that SVCE is supporting communities to members to switch to EVs this evening. We've heard about electricity use and how it's changing and the work that SVCE is doing to ensure a long-term clean power supply. And now I'm going to shift the focus to you all and the steps that you can take as community leaders to reduce carbon pollution in our region and the resources that we're providing to help you all really leverage your authority and power. The objective is to provide a quick recap of the resources that we have available to your agency and kind of an overview of how you can use them, and then provide a quick status update. We have met with each of you one-on-one, as Chair Walia mentioned, as well as most of your staff at this point, so provide a quick update on what's coming, and then of course to answer your questions and hear any comments about things that are happening in your city. Next slide. Okay, so just a quick recap. You all know by now that we have launched this program to provide $4 million in resources to help you adopt policies and permitting practices that can really support the move to carbon-free buildings, right? And this is because while rebates and tax credits can really reduce the upfront financial cost of electrification and rates can reduce the ongoing operating costs, we really need local codes as well as regional policies and permitting to kind of smooth adoption and ensure that we kind of can increase access on time and with less friction. Next slide. Okay. So we know that this move from right now, we're at less than 1% adoption of clean appliances, and we need to move over the next 20 years to 100% adoption. We know that's not going to be easy. It's going to, require changes and require a lot of hard work from all of us. But we also understand that sensible policies and practical processes can ease the transition, right? And this is really the key role that you all play. We know at this point that the transition is going to happen. The timeline might not be 100% clear, but BACMED has adopted rules to end the sale of gas appliances beginning in 2027. South Coast AQMD, which is home to 17 million people, is in the process and will be voting in early June on very similar rules. And statewide, CARB is now in the rulemaking process to also begin the timeline for similar rules statewide. So we know that we're moving in that direction, but the question is really, how challenging is it? How hard is it for our region? And you all play a critical role in ensuring not just like the timely success to meet our climate goals, but also that it's as easy as possible for our community members, for your residents. And this is what really we think that these programs can do. And then, of course, our technical resources. We know all of our cities are really strapped for staff support. So the purpose of our technical resources and staff support is to kind of enable you to have the capacity to implement these policies with less burden. Next slide. Okay. So just really, this is kind of a quick picture of the kind of resources to refresh your memory on that we have available, right? Ongoing one-on-one staff support, and then we're in this process now of creating a tailored action plan for each jurisdiction. Each 13 of you are unique, and so we're creating that to meet your unique needs, unique goals. And then we have a whole bench of contractors that include technical, legal, and other resources to support your staff. And then for a few cities who want to really go the extra mile, I would say, and step up and reach even further, we're providing some additional level resources, including access to national level climate change training so that you can interact with other leaders across the country. A stipend for a part-time one-year fellow. We know that kind of going farther will take additional effort, as well as kind of expanding consultant support as needed. Next slide. Okay. So I mentioned after we've had these one-on-one meetings with you and most of your staff, and that our next step is to work on a tailored action plan, right? And so we've kind of provided this menu of options. I'm not going to go through the entire menu. I'm just going to highlight a couple of items here. But the idea is that each jurisdiction will select the menu items that makes the most sense, and then we'll help put in the resources in place. So first, in the foundational practices side of things, I'm going to just kind of pause a little longer and talk about the third row, which is about reviewing new construction REACH codes. This is something that we've been talking about. Actually, I just checked because I was like, it's really been many months we've been talking about this. Almost a year to the day, actually, that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the city of Berkeley. So we've had many, which is their gas ban that they put in place several years ago. So over the last year, we've provided several updates, again, to you all, to your staff. We've held a webinar briefing directly with all of your city attorneys, as well as brought on additional special counsel to advise and speak with your attorney to attorney. And just a couple weeks ago on March 26th, the kind of long wait and back and forth and that drama of what was going to happen was finalized when Berkeley announced that they would not be going forward to the Supreme Court, that they were accepting the court's decision, and that they would be pausing their enforcement of their rule. Since that time, again, although we've been talking about this for about a year, we've had kind of more questions from different cities and a couple more cities that are thinking, going back to their attorneys and thinking about what doing. So this is simply a reminder in this moment, as you may be getting more questions, that we have options available on our website that can help for cities who are looking for different pathways to continue to move towards pollution-free buildings. We have those resources available. We also have special counsel available to consult with your attorney. And we know that this will be a city-by-city decision. We're here for technical resources, but this really comes down to a legal decision and what makes the most sense for your community given your current rules. So I just want to emphasize that because I know it's on folks' minds today. And then I'll say, moving over into kind of advancing practices, and of course what's really important, we were developing everything that's kind of on this list after the ruling in the Ninth Circuit came out. So again, our rule is as technical experts, but everything that we're thinking about in the world of existing buildings is really under the consideration of this ruling that's already happened in Berkeley, right, from Berkeley. So we're really interested in incentivizing and making it easier for folks to electrify, not kind of pushing up against these EPCA rules that came down from Berkeley. So I just want to make sure it's a little awkward transition there. But we have a set of kind of advancing practices that we just think are sensible things that I always say that I would want to be in place to protect my family, my mother who is going to go through and do any kind of renovations to her home or making changes to AC. We want to really make sure that people are taking the steps to get their home ready for BACMED. And then we have a further set of leading practices for cities who really want to make sure that they're helping to bend that adoption curve, increase electrification, and really prepare their community more. I'm happy to go into any of those details in questions if you want to, but I know we've talked about them a lot. Okay, and the next slide. All right, so this is the first table. I promise you're going to get to see this table on probably about bi-monthly updates with our bi-monthly basis with all the updates that we're having with each city. We're just starting this now. So you can see we have met with all 13 of you, and we've met with 10 out of 13 agencies. Other ones, the other 3, we're in great communication with, just a little bit challenges on scheduling. And we are now drafting these customized action plans, which we will begin delivering to your staff this month. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm delighted to take any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for your work, working with each team, each city, and thank you for the presentation. We'll take questions. Director Meadows.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation and very helpful meetings. So I wonder, as you met across with folks across all our jurisdictions, both directors and staff, or at least one case it looked like it was Environmental Commission, what did you find the commonality of need or interest was across the jurisdictions? And what were some of the maybe outlier ideas that you might want to share with the rest of us who weren't as creative?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I will add a couple, and Tony, if you've got additional thoughts, feel free to chime in after. So I would say we found overall of everybody that we met with, a strong interest in continuing to move forward and to take different levels of action. The thing that, and also since a year ago, we've been talking about this, the idea of really ensuring that when air conditioning is in place, that it is a bidirectional heat pump. That continues to be the policy that folks really think is sensible and makes for a lot of good sense. We got an interesting idea that we have added to the list around at the time of, Tony, can you actually remind me, it's about at the time of sale, the idea that we got from one of our cities. That was the one that, I don't want to name who, even though it was a wonderful idea.
I'm sorry, Zoe, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay. Well, we got some ideas around at the time of sale to actually have some requirements around electrification readiness that we hadn't had before. So we've added that to the list. I think that was the only new idea that we had that wasn't there previously.
Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zoe. Other questions? Mayor Showalter?
Well, mine isn't really a question. I just want to share Mountain View's recent experience. I know everybody was kind of talking about it at dinner, so I'll go over it with you. When we passed our REACH code several years ago, we really took a very straightforward approach, meaning that we just banned new gas appliances in new construction, new residential construction, and we did have one exception, and that was for restaurant kitchens. But other than that, we were going all electric in new construction. And if you were doing remodel that was more than 50%, the standard, then you were required to put in all new electric as well. And we have gotten some pushback with that, but really less than I expected. But last night on the consent calendar, we had a suspension of the section of our REACH code that applies to gasoline appliances come up for discussion. And the staff apparently had been working on alternatives and didn't feel that they had one at the moment. And our building staff has been getting several inquiries a week, sometimes even several inquiries a day, of people who are doing primarily single-family remodels that want to keep their gas stoves or put in a gas stove. That really seems to be the issue. So it was very awkward for the people on the counter to be saying, well, it's against the rules, and citizens saying, but the federal government has said we can do this. So with that in mind, we agreed to suspend just the portion that relates to gas appliances. And with the caveats that we are going to work diligently, we want the staff to work diligently to find a replacement. Working with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, looking at things that other communities have done, looking at the suggestions on interior air quality management, to come up with a fix, essentially, because we have a very strong belief that this is really important. I mean, it's important for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. It's also very, very important for public health. And also, we would really like, I mean, we live in earthquake country. If you have and during earthquakes, rupture of a gas line is a major cause of fires. There's the asthma issue, just all those things. So everybody's really pretty upset about it, very upset about it. So we're going to continue to, although we cannot, our attorney felt like we couldn't continue to require people to put in electric appliances. We can certainly encourage them to. We will provide guidance to put in electrical appliances and guide them into the information for rebates, et cetera, that we've all worked on. We're also going to be taking this up at the Council Sustainability Committee, and we'll be having a meeting in May where we talk about options. And the idea is that after that meeting, we will come back to the council and pass a new ordinance. It isn't really, it's never clear when you begin one of these things exactly how long this will take, but we're hoping it will be as short as possible, and as short as possible. And then the other thing that was, another thing that was part of the motion is to add advocacy at the federal level to amend the outdated statute that was passed in the 70s. I mean, things were very different in the 70s. That's the basis of this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling. And so we're going to start that. And I personally, about a week ago, reached out to the National League of Cities environmental lead about how we could go forward with that on the policy committee. I work on the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Policy Committee. So those were some things those were the things that were included in the motion. And there was a very robust public comment. As you know, we are blessed with carbon-free Mountain View. You've heard many comments from them over the years, and they had quite a number of suggestions that we'll be following up with. So I just wanted to share that with you, and we'll keep you posted. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's always good to learn from each other. That's what makes each city stronger and the county in a better place. That's how we get the great numbers where the county leads. Other questions? Okay, with that, thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you, Tony. We see you here virtually. Great work, both of you. That takes us to the end of the agenda, and thank you all for staying a little longer. The study sessions were rolled into the board meeting. Typically, we'd like to strive for board meeting ending earlier, but all of this, overall, it's not bad. We are just spending 2 hours here, so the agenda became longer. And this is the time for board member announcements and direction on any future agenda items. If someone has a suggestion or an announcement, we already know about the Earth Day events. Mir Mohan?
Yes, we do know about the Earth Day events, but not the details. I think there are about 5 cities that are celebrating Earth Day, but I just wanted to do a shout out for Cupertino. We are Earth and Arbor Day, so we are very proud of our trees. And so there's a lot of there's a tree planting ceremony that's going to take place, and the city manages 20,000 trees. So we are very protective and proud of our tree management program. So just wanted to let everyone know that we are considered a tree city, which I guess in the tree community means a lot.
Thank you. Saratoga is a tree city too, and we do Arbor Day another day. So it's good to know Cupertino is one as well. Thank you. Is that an invitation to the board and the public to attend what time?
Absolutely.
On the 20th?
Except that most cities have their own things going on. It's from
time?
11 to 3, and it's right here in the library field, which is this way.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Director Scozola.
Just want to say we're one of the 5 cities celebrating as well, and one of our several nicknames is the Tree City. So, thank you.
Wonderful. More Tree Cities, more Earth Day. Okay. Wonderful. With that,
I was just going to share.
Oh,
that,
I didn't see your
yes,
hand.
we do have an Earth Day on the same day, and we have a big presence of our youth that will be helping run that and AAUW. So
Wonderful. Wishing each of the cities a fabulous event on the 20th. And happy Earth Day to all, happy Earth Month. And before I adjourn tonight's meeting, it's exactly 9 o'clock. Just bear with me for 1 minute, please. I'd like to adjourn this meeting honoring and thanking Tricia Ortiz. Thank you for guiding SVCE the last couple of years, the SVCE team, or as I like to say, Team SVCE and the board. You have helped us all with all the issues. Some tricky issues here, and we also I'd like to thank you on behalf of the board for helping transition as Mike Callahan takes over as the general counsel part of SVCE. You have been a valuable member of this team. Thank you, wish you the best, and with that, the meeting is adjourned at 9 o'clock. Thank you.